Imagine being asked to replace a genius who has not yet left the room. Imagine being summoned to take the place of a man who is still standing on the same stage as you, still holding the same guitar, still, in the eyes of the world, the leader of the band you have just joined. Now imagine that the genius you are replacing is not a stranger, but your childhood friend, the boy you hitchhiked and busked through the south of France with, the one you traded chords with at lunchtime as teenagers, the one who is now watching himself be quietly erased and does not always seem to understand that it is happening. This was the situation David Gilmour walked into in January of 1968, and it remains one of the most psychologically impossible jobs in the entire history of popular music. We tend to tell this story as a triumph, the young guitarist who stepped up and saved the band and went on to glory. But the truth underneath that triumph is far stranger, far heavier, and far more human, and it deserves to be told honestly. To understand the weight of what Gilmour carried, you have to understand the strangeness of how it began. He was not brought into Pink Floyd to lead. He was brought in to cover. Syd Barrett, the founder, the man who had named the band, the author of every early hit, the source of their entire whimsical and frightening psychedelic identity, was disintegrating in real time. His mind, dissolving under the combined pressure of sudden fame and relentless chemical experimentation, could no longer be relied upon to perform. He would forget lyrics or refuse to sing them. He would detune his guitar mid-show or simply stand motionless, staring, while the band played around him. On a now infamous American television appearance, he was supposed to mime along and answer questions, and instead he stood frozen and silent, leaving the others scrambling to cover the awkwardness. The man who had been the most electric presence in British psychedelia had become, on stage, a kind of beautiful statue, present in body and absent in every other way. So the plan, in those first weeks of 1968, was almost absurd in its delicacy. Pink Floyd would temporarily become a five-piece. Gilmour would stand beside Barrett and quietly play the parts that Syd could no longer reliably play, while Syd remained, officially, a full member of the band. The understudy and the star, side by side. The understudy covering for a star, who was, in every meaningful sense, already a ghost. Hold that image in your mind, because it is almost unbearable. Gilmour, 21 years old, freshly recruited, standing on stage directly next to his deteriorating friend, playing the guitar lines that should have been Syd's, watching the audience fix their eyes on Syd, the famous one, the magnetic one, while the actual functioning music came increasingly out of the new man beside him. He was being asked to be invisible and indispensable at the same time. There were only a handful of these five-piece shows. Gilmour's first appearance with the band was on the 12th of January at Aston University, in a set that included future classics still taking shape. By the 20th of January at Hastings Pier, Barrett would play with Pink Floyd for the very last time. And then came the moment that defines the entire tragedy, a moment so casual that it is almost crueler for its complete lack of ceremony. On the 26th of January, the band was in the van, driving to a show at Southampton, and someone simply asked whether they should bother going by to pick up Syd. And the answer, unspoken or spoken, was no. They just kept driving. The founder of Pink Floyd, the man without whom none of them would have been in that van at all, was removed from the band, not by a confrontation, not by a vote, not by a dramatic farewell, but by the quiet decision not to offer him a ride. The genius was edited out of his own creation by an act of omission. And here is where Gilmour's burden truly begins, because the world did not know any of this. There was no announcement. The official confirmation of Barrett's departure would not come until the 6th of April, months later. For all those weeks, Pink Floyd toured and recorded as a band, haunted by the man it had just lost, and Gilmour was the one standing in his place, expected to be a guitarist, a singer, a stage presence, a functioning professional, while everyone who loved the band was secretly or openly mourning the magician he had replaced. Imagine the loneliness of that position. You have the job, but you cannot celebrate it because the job exists only because your friend's mind is collapsing. Think about the cruelty of the comparison he could never escape. Syd Barrett was not merely a good or even a great songwriter. He was a once-in-a-generation original, a writer of songs that were whimsical and menacing and utterly singular, songs no one else on earth could have written, built from English nursery imagery and acid-lit dread in proportions only he understood. To step into his place was to invite, every single night, the silent and devastating question hanging in the air of every venue. You are not him. And Gilmour knew it. He has spoken about it across the decades with a striking and uncharacteristic vulnerability, calling the whole situation kind of tragic, admitting that he was a young and ambitious man of 21 who could not possibly turn down an offer this enormous, while also being painfully, constantly aware of what, and crucially of whom, he was replacing. He did not get to enjoy his big break cleanly. It arrived soaked in his friend's ruin. Now consider the deeper psychological knot, the thing that elevates this far above a simple story about a job opening. Gilmour did not resent Barrett. He did not hate the man whose place he was taking. He loved him. This was his friend from boyhood, the person who had, in a sense, given him the very world of music he was now inheriting. So the burden Gilmour carried was not merely artistic, the pressure of filling impossible shoes in front of a skeptical audience. It was moral. It was emotional. Every single note he played was simultaneously an act of rescue, saving the band and his friends from total collapse, and an act of replacement, taking the position of a man he deeply cared about, who was at that very moment losing everything he had built. He was, in the same gesture, the savior, and in the cruel optics of the situation, the usurper. How do you build a life's work on a foundation like that? How do you become the voice and the guitar of a band whose very soul you stand accused, however unfairly, of having displaced? And here is the part that reveals the true measure of the man, the choice that separates a mere replacement from an artist. Gilmour did not respond to this impossible position by trying to imitate Barrett. That would have been the obvious move, and it would have been fatal. A copy is always lesser than the original, and a Syd impersonator would have been a permanent reminder of the absence, a karaoke ghost. Instead, slowly, patiently, over years rather than months, Gilmour became something Barrett never was and never could have been. Where Syd was jagged, fractured, brilliant in sudden flashes, and then lost in chaos, Gilmour was fluid, controlled, sustained, a guitarist of immense melodic patience, a player whose solos do not explode so much as they breathe, bending and aching and holding notes until they seem to weep. He did not try to fill the specific hole that Syd had left. He understood, perhaps instinctively, that the hole could not be filled, only honored. So he built a different room entirely, with different architecture and different light, and he invited the whole world to come inside it. And the world came, in numbers that would have been unimaginable in 1968. The ultimate proof of Gilmour's character, though, is not in the stadiums he would later fill. It is in what he did with the memory of the man he replaced. He did not bury Syd. He did not pretend the founder had never existed, the way so many bands erase their casualties. He honored him. When Barrett, in his fragile post-Floyd years, attempted to make solo records, it was Gilmour who stepped in to produce and play on them, gently helping his broken friend commit his last scattered fragments of genius to tape, an act of loyalty with no commercial motive whatsoever. And years later, the band that Gilmour now led would record what may be the most devastating tribute one group of musicians has ever paid to a lost member, a long, aching, wordless and then worded elegy for the founder they had lost to madness, in which Gilmour's guitar carries the grief that language could not. The man hired to replace Syd Barrett became, in the fullness of time, the keeper of his flame, the one who made sure the world never forgot the genius whose place he had taken. So the burden Gilmour carried was never really the simple question of whether he was good enough to replace Syd Barrett. He was more than good enough, and history has settled that beyond argument. The burden was something heavier and stranger and more lasting, the lifelong task of being the living, breathing, performing guitarist of a band that was defined, in part, by the ghost of the man he succeeded. The task of building genuine greatness on a foundation made partly of someone else's tragedy. The task of doing all of it with grace and loyalty and love, rather than with denial or erasure or the easy comfort of pretending the ghost was not there. So when you hear Gilmour's guitar soar and sustain and ache on the songs that made Pink Floyd immortal, on the long solos that seem to reach for something just out of grasp, ask yourself what you are truly hearing inside that mournful, weeping tone. Is it the sound of a man who took a dead friend's place? Or is it the sound of a man who spent his entire career making certain that the place was never, for a single moment, truly empty? Description. How do you replace a genius who is still standing right next to you on stage? When David Gilmour joined Pink Floyd in January of 1968, he was not hired to lead. He was hired to quietly cover for Syd Barrett, his disintegrating childhood friend, while Syd remained officially in the band. For a few surreal weeks, they played side by side, the understudy covering for a star who was already a ghost. Then one day, the band simply drove past Syd's house and chose not to pick him up. So how did Gilmour carry the impossible double burden of saving the band while replacing a friend he loved? And did he ever truly fill the empty space he inherited? Or did he spend a lifetime making sure it was never empty?